Hi, my name's Kira, and I used to believe that being the quiet one meant I was being respectful. Turns out, in my family, silence just made me invisible. They told people I walked away from the cabin, that I didn't care. But while they were throwing backyard barbecues and posing for newspaper photos, they were also filing paperwork behind my back to take everything. And when I finally said something, they called me ungrateful. But here's what they didn't expect. What happens when the quiet one finally speaks? They'd already parked their cars when I pulled into the gravel circle. Ruben's SUV stood in its usual spot near the porch. Corinne's minivan, too. No one had texted me a reminder or directions, though I didn't need either. I knew this cabin better than anyone. I stepped out of my car and grabbed the dish from the back seat. Chicken pot pie, still warm. My hands shook a little, but I told myself it was just the breeze picking up across the trees. The front door was half open. I could hear the murmur of voices, then laughter. Inside, the living room was lit with the soft yellow of Edison bulbs strung around the beams. The scent of baked ham and fresh rolls clung to the air, but not one person turned when I stepped in. I stood there for a moment, long enough to notice that the music had been switched off and replaced by someone's playlist. Country, something Ruben liked. I cleared my throat and offered a half smile. Hey. Nothing. Velma, my mother, brushed past me with a tray of glasses. You can put that in the kitchen, she said without looking. Then she turned back to Corinne and asked, Did Ruben ever tell you what he did to fix that water pump? Genius. I took the dish to the kitchen, set it down, uncovered it. No one asked what it was. No one thanked me. There were name cards on the dining table. Mine wasn't among them. That should have been the clue. I found a quiet corner near the fireplace where the heat was barely reaching. My father, Luther, was in the study. Door cracked open. I wasn't eavesdropping, not really. I was walking by when I heard my name. She's got no sense of tradition, he said. Frankly, we regret raising her. She's not what we hoped. It was the tone that got me, not the words. Like he wasn't angry, just resigned. My hand tightened around the back of a wooden chair. I waited. I wanted someone to disagree with him. A pause. Then another voice, deeper. Uncle Kent, maybe, answered. That's harsh, but you're not wrong. I left before I could hear more. I didn't slam the door, didn't drop the dish, didn't call them out. I just walked out of the house I'd helped pay taxes on, down the steps I'd rebuilt with Ruben, through the yard where I'd planted flowers Velma later claimed she hated the color of. I sat in my car, keys in hand, and stared at the dashboard. My breath didn't hitch. I didn't cry. I just cooled down. Later that evening, I checked Facebook. Corinne had posted a family picture with a caption, Fisk family reunion, 3 generations strong. I zoomed in. Everyone was there. Even Jenna, the cousin who moved to Florida. Everyone except me. It wasn't a mistake. I wasn't overlooked. I was erased. There's a kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels surgical. That night, I checked into the small motel off 93. I had packed a weekend bag, assuming I'd be welcome. I sat on the edge of the bed, dish still in my car, untouched. The TV played muted weather reports I didn't watch. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up the folder labeled Cabin Deed. I had saved a scanned copy years ago when Grandpa passed. My name was still on it, sole owner since 2018. Funny how people forget legal facts when feelings get in the way of fairness. I also opened another file, emails between Velma and me, going back nearly a decade. Promises, requests, strings of guilt disguised as concern. I read them without blinking, let them pile up in my chest like frost on glass. There's a moment between betrayal and revenge where everything is still. That's where I sat, for hours, cross-legged on a bed that wasn't mine, in a room that smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. And I realized something in me had broken, not shattered, not ruined, but split cleanly. Like something that was supposed to break, finally did. The light from the motel window faded slowly, giving way to the quiet hum of the parking lot below. I didn't remember falling asleep. I must have drifted off with the laptop still open on my lap. When I finally sat up, my back stiff from the unforgiving mattress, the digital clock on the nightstand read 6:52 a.m. I packed my things without noise. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my rental on the southern edge of Kalispell, the sun had barely lifted itself over the tree line. The house was cold but familiar, unbothered by what had happened the day before. I wasn't. Inside, I turned the heat up, kicked off my shoes, and headed straight for the hallway closet. Behind the winter coats and an old box of Christmas lights was a drawer built into the wall, small and shallow, where I kept the things I didn't want to remember, but couldn't bring myself to throw away. I slid it open and reached for a bundle wrapped in twine. Birthday cards, postcards, little notes Velma used to tape to my lunchbox when I was still someone she seemed proud of. One envelope was different, yellowed, torn at the edges. It was addressed in her handwriting, 2002. I recognized it immediately. I unfolded the single sheet inside. Just 7 words written in slanted cursive. "One day, this cabin will be yours." I stared at it for a long while, like it might disintegrate if I blinked. A single piece of paper had carried a decade of belief. I had turned down jobs in other cities because of that sentence. I had stayed close, made repairs, paid bills, all because I thought I was the one meant to protect it, to keep it whole. I took a picture of the letter and sent it to Velma. No message, just the image. She called within minutes. "You still have that thing?" she asked, her voice flat. "You wrote it." "I barely remember. You were upset about something, and I don't know, wrote it to calm you down." "You told me the cabin would be mine," I said, though the words already felt weightless. "Oh, Kira," she sighed. "You take everything so seriously. That was over 20 years ago." "I know exactly how long it's been." A pause. I could almost hear her smiling on the other end, like I was amusing, not angry. "You've always had such a dramatic streak," she said lightly. "Honestly, I thought you would have grown out of it by now." I didn't answer. I ended the call. By the time I'd changed out of my work clothes and sat down at the kitchen table with a lukewarm cup of tea, the disbelief had settled into something else. Disgust, maybe. Not just at her. At myself, too. For buying into a story that had never belonged to me. The knock on my door came around 7:45 that evening. I didn't expect visitors. When I opened it, there stood Imelda Crane, my former high school math teacher, now a retiree who still wore orthopedic sandals with confidence and parked her Chevy crooked at the curb like she owned the street. "Did I catch you at a bad time?" she asked. "No, come in." She stepped inside, holding a reusable grocery bag and a look that meant business. "I wasn't sure I should say anything, but I didn't want you blindsided," she began. "Your father and Reuben were in town last week. They were meeting with a lawyer. I know the woman. They were at the same property office my niece works in." I didn't interrupt. I just waited. "They're doing something with the cabin, transferring it. It wasn't just talk. There were papers, signatures." I nodded. "They didn't mention anything to me." Imelda's expression softened. "Honey, I don't think they plan to." I thanked her. She didn't stay long. After she left, I sat down again, same spot, same table, and reopened my laptop. I pulled up the deed Grandpa had mailed me the year he died. Still in my name. No liens, no co-signers, no shared ownership. I cross-checked the parcel number. Everything matched. The last update was 2018. They were trying to steal something that was already mine. I stared at the screen for a few minutes, then opened a blank note. I typed 3 lines. Confirm property activity. Consult with Nadine, lawyer. Never ask for what's already yours. Then I sat back and whispered to myself, not with rage, but with a certainty that felt like a slow ignition. They forgot who they're dealing with. I didn't sleep that night, but I wouldn't call it insomnia. It was more like a kind of quiet pacing inside my own head, rearranging facts, cutting out the noise. Around 4:30 a.m., I finally gave up and made a pot of coffee. The house was dark, but my mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. I sat at the kitchen table, steam curling from the rim of the mug, and checked my phone out of habit. That's when I saw the notification. Fisk Family Chat, 3. New messages. I almost didn't open it. That group thread was mostly logistics for potlucks and baby showers, which I was rarely included in beyond the "can you bring napkins" level. But I did open it. Corinne had written, "Kira can stay in the guest loft, right? Or do we need her to handle the food again like last year?" Ruben had reacted with a thumbs up. And then, someone, probably my cousin Jane, added, "She's good at being invisible." I stared at the screen for a few seconds too long. The phone dimmed, then went black. I didn't reply. I didn't type out the long, cutting message that formed in my brain. I didn't remind them that the guest loft had no heating, no privacy, and still had water damage they refused to fix. I didn't say a word. Instead, I took a screenshot. That afternoon, I invited Velma over for coffee. She arrived 15 minutes late, tapping her sunglasses against her purse like she was irritated by the very idea of the invitation. "This place still smells like cedar," she said as she sat down. "You know that's a sign of poor ventilation." I poured her coffee, set the screenshot face up on the table between us. She glanced at it, then at me. "You know your brother," she said, sipping. "He doesn't mean anything by it." "And Corinne?" I asked. Velma shrugged, like she was swatting away a mosquito. "You've always had a strong reaction to things, Kira. You hold on to things too long. It's exhausting." "I just wanted to know," I said, keeping my voice flat, "if I'm a guest or a relative." She smiled, not warmly. "You're overthinking it again. Why does it matter where you sleep? The cabin's big enough for all of us." Except, it wasn't. Not when the kitchen was being remodeled for Corinne's Pinterest board and I was treated like a part-time staffer. Not when every new picture frame excluded me by default. Later that week, Sunday afternoon came with church and small talk and the annual fall bake sale. I didn't want to go, but I brought lemon pie out of muscle memory more than spirit. It sat untouched for over an hour. I stayed close to the booth, kept to myself. The sun was soft that day, filtered through cloud cover, and the crisp air made it easier to stay silent. Until I heard my name. Velma stood with 2 other women near the edge of the tables, paper cups in hand. She was smiling, performing really. "Oh, Kira," she said with a chuckle, loud enough to carry. She's always been the dramatic one. She clung to things like ownership and fairness like it was her job. Thought the cabin was hers. Would you believe that? One of the women turned to look at me. Her gaze wasn't cruel. It was confused, like she didn't know whether to pity me or dismiss me. I held on to the pie tin. My hands didn't tremble. I didn't smile. I walked away. Back home that night, I opened the old diary I kept tucked behind my filing cabinet, a green spiral notebook with a cartoon fox on the front, something I'd nearly tossed a dozen times. Inside were years of uneven writing, scribbled thoughts, things I hadn't meant for anyone to read. I flipped to a random page. "Ruben got in trouble today, but Dad said he was just expressing himself. When I cried, he told me to stop being weak. My handwriting looked like someone else's." I closed the book slowly and leaned back in my chair. It was never that they forgot me. That would have been easier. Forgetting is careless. This was curated, a calculated removal. They made space for me not to exist. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to crawl back into that space. By the time I pushed the diary back onto the shelf, the sky outside had already shifted to gray. I made a cup of instant oatmeal, left half of it untouched, and changed into jeans and a plain sweatshirt. If they were going to try and rewrite the story, I wanted to be sure I had the pages they couldn't edit. At 9:15 a.m., I walked into the Kalispell County Clerk's office. The woman behind the desk, maybe in her 20s, nervous fingers tapping against her keyboard, looked up when I cleared my throat. "Hi," I said. "I need to check property records on a parcel I own. Just want to confirm there haven't been any changes filed." "Of course," she replied, pulling her cardigan tighter across her shoulders. "Do you have the parcel number?" I gave it to her, watched her screen reflect in her glasses as she typed. The pause came after just a few seconds. Her lips parted slightly before she spoke. "There's something here. A preliminary reassignment filed 2 weeks ago. Looks like it hasn't fully processed yet, but it's logged." "Who's listed as the transferee?" She hesitated. Then, "Reuben Fisk." I didn't flinch. I just nodded once. "Can I get a printed copy of the document?" She handed me a sheet without making eye contact. I walked back to my car slowly, sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and the windows cracked, letting in just enough of the morning air to keep my hands from trembling. The page sat in my lap like a warning label. They were doing it. Not talking about it, not dreaming about it, actually doing it. I pulled out my phone and texted Marin. "Me. Did you know they were filing to move the cabin title to Reuben?" It took a few minutes before 3 dots appeared. Marin. "I didn't know it was filed, but they've been talking about it for a while. They thought you wouldn't notice until it was done." Me. "Of course they did." Marin. "I'm sorry, Kira." I put the phone down and leaned my head against the headrest. They really thought I'd never check, that I'd just stay quiet, like always, that I'd keep showing up with food and apologies, while they made plans with my property like I was just a tenant too timid to knock on the landlord's door. That night, I sat at my desk with every light in the house on. I had 3 windows open on my laptop: the property record, Reuben's recent social media posts, and the family chat archive. 2 weeks earlier, Reuben had posted a photo of the cabin kitchen. Caption: Phase 1, backsplash mock-up. Corinne's pic. She's got an eye. I hadn't seen it before. I scrolled through the comments. Velma: "Can't wait to see it when it's done." Jane, my cousin: "Y'all are turning that place into a dream home." No mention of me. No question about who owned it. It was as if I didn't exist. I opened the chat thread. A week ago, Reuben had texted. Reuben: "Corinne says the mountain light would look great above the sink." Velma: "Yes, rustic but clean." Jane: "Totally." Not one person asked, "Does Kira know?" Not one. I scrolled higher. A conversation from late September. Corinne: "If we start now, we could have the guest rooms repainted before Thanksgiving." Velma: "Don't forget to ask if she's coming first. Or maybe don't." I snapped the laptop shut, got up, poured a glass of water, and drank it standing. Then I picked up my phone and called Reuben. He answered after the second ring. "Hey," he said, casual like we hadn't just spent the last month on opposite ends of a silent war. "I have a question," I said. "Okay. So the backsplash isn't just hypothetical?" There was a pause. Then, "Look, you don't even really use the place. You're always working or gone. You said it yourself last summer. You didn't even sleep there for 2 months." "It's in my name," I said quietly. "Since 2018. You knew that." "It's family," he replied, voice tightening. "What's yours is all of ours." I exhaled once, just enough to reset. I don't recall ever signing over my property in the name of group sentiment. He laughed, not kindly. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We're just updating the place. It needed work. That's what thieves say when they redecorate before they rob you." "You're being dramatic, Kira. You're being dishonest." I hung up. No final word, no threat. Just a click, clean and clear. It wasn't about the backsplash, or the light fixture. It wasn't even about the cabin anymore. It was about being replaced so subtly that even the walls stopped expecting your voice. But they underestimated me the first time. They won't get the chance to do it again. The wind had picked up by the time I turned onto the gravel road leading to the cabin. Dried pine needles whipped against the windshield as I slowed near the mailbox, half expecting to find something hostile stuffed inside it. Nothing yet. It was just after 5:30 on Friday evening when I parked, the sky fading into that early autumn gold that tricks you into thinking it's still warm outside. It wasn't. The air had turned. The kind of cold that makes you wish you brought gloves, even if it's not winter yet. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I didn't need to. The last time I waited for an invitation, I got edited out of a family photo. When I knocked, I heard shuffling. Footsteps, low voices. The door opened a few inches, and then my father's face appeared behind it, creased with confusion more than anything else. "We're just finishing up dinner," he said. "Good," I replied, stepping forward. "I didn't come to eat. I came to talk." Luther opened the door wider. Behind him, Corinne stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, as if she'd been waiting for this moment all day. Reuben wasn't in sight, but I could hear the familiar clinking of a fork against glass. He was still at the table. I stepped inside, scanned the space. The kitchen smelled like pork roast and apple cider. It used to be a comforting smell. Now it felt like a scene set up for someone else's play. I walked over and sat in the armchair near the fireplace, the one Velma always kept a quilt on, even when it was 90 degrees outside. She entered a moment later, wiping her hands on a dish towel and giving me a look I couldn't quite decode. Displeased, but polite. Like I'd arrived late to a performance, and she had to pretend not to mind. Reuben finally came around the corner, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Kira?" he said. Flat. No smile, just acknowledgement. I didn't answer right away. I waited for the silence to stretch thin before I broke it. "There's a deed transfer in process," I said, steady. "Filed with the county 2 weeks ago. It lists you as the new title holder." Velma scoffed before anyone else could speak. "That place has been in the family for decades. It's not yours, it's ours. It's always been part of the Fisk name." I nodded once. "Except legally, it's mine. Since 2018. Reuben cleared his throat. "We didn't think you'd care. You're always working, traveling. You're distant, Kira." "Distant doesn't mean disposable," I said, quieter than I intended. "You're using my absence as permission." Velma narrowed her eyes. "You act like we owe you something. We raised you. You wouldn't have a place in this world without us. And now you want to take what's ours because you feel—" "What? Left out?" I didn't blink. "I paid for Dad's hospital bills when the insurance didn't cover the anesthesia. I paid Mom's dental work, every last veneer. I paid for Reuben's car insurance during both years he was unemployed. The only thing I didn't pay for was Corinne's yoga retreat, but that's probably next on someone's list." Corinne's lips parted. "We never asked you to." "No," I said, turning to her. "But you never offered either." I looked back at Velma. "I did it because I thought it mattered. Because I thought we mattered, even when I wasn't invited, even when I wasn't mentioned, even when you looked past me like I was air." Luther spoke then, his voice low but sharp. "You're always keeping tabs, Kira. That's not generosity. That's control. That's a ledger." I stood. If it were a ledger, I'd be sending invoices instead of reminders. I've never once asked for payback, but I'm being called ungrateful for protecting something that was handed to me and stolen in pieces. Let's talk about that word the next time you flip on the light switch or open a fridge you didn't buy groceries for. Reuben stepped forward. "We didn't think you'd fight this hard." "I know." I walked to the door, paused long enough to leave a silence in the air that wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. "You thought being quiet meant I'd never speak up," I said, "but you mistook self-control for consent. That's on you." Then I left. I didn't drive straight home after walking out of the cabin. I stopped at a gas station and filled the tank halfway, even though I had enough to get back. I stood there with the nozzle in my hand, watching the numbers roll, listening to the automated voice thank me for my loyalty. That phrase stuck with me. Loyalty. Funny how everyone expects it, but rarely returns it. Sunday morning came quietly. I sat in a booth at Finch's Cafe on Main Street, the kind of place with torn leather menus and mismatched mugs. It was early enough that I had the corner to myself. The waitress, Dana, already knew I'd take black coffee and oatmeal without asking. I was halfway through the bowl when I saw a hand slide a newspaper onto the table beside me. "Thought you'd want to see this," said a voice I didn't recognize. By the time I turned to look, the woman was already walking out. She wore a heavy wool coat and moved like someone used to leaving quickly. I unfolded the flathead beacon and stared at the front page. Local Family Preserves Generational Cabin. Reuben Fisk leads restoration project. There it was. A photo of the cabin. My cabin. The same porch I rebuilt after a storm took out the front steps. The shutters I repainted by hand one summer while everyone else was at the lake. The kitchen window that still had the spiderweb crack from when I dropped the garden hose too hard against the sill. Not one word about me, not even a mention. I read the article twice, slower the second time, as if looking for a typo that would explain the omission. Nothing. Just quotes from Reuben and one from Velma. "We're so proud of Reuben, taking the lead on what really matters, keeping family history alive." I finished my coffee in 2 long swallows and sent a text to Marin. Me. "Did you see the beacon today?" Marin. "Don't tell me they printed it." Me. "Front page, full story. I'm not in it." Marin. "They told the reporter you didn't want to be included, said you were stepping back from involvement." Of course they did. That afternoon, the town held its annual artisan fair near the old high school gym. I went because I needed to be seen. Not for the sake of vanity, but because I wanted to make it clear I was still here, still present, still paying property taxes and fixing frozen pipes and answering when the alarm company called about power outages. Velma was posted at one of the community booths, dressed in a tailored red coat and wearing that smile she saved for people who didn't know her well enough to ask deeper questions. "Isn't that your daughter?" a woman asked her, nodding in my direction. Velma didn't look. She kept her gaze on the flyer she was handing out. "She used to live here," she said with a light laugh. "But she's been gone so long, I don't think she considers this home anymore." I walked over, picked up one of the brochures, and met her eyes. The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite regret. "Then I suppose it's time I stop paying for the electricity here, too," I said, folding the paper in half and placing it back on the table. She didn't say a word. I didn't need her to. That evening, I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and called Nadine. She answered on the second ring. "You ready?" she asked, no greeting needed. "It's time," I said. "I want a formal cease and desist, use of my image, my property, references to the cabin or to me in any future public statements, and I want a letter of eviction served to Reuben, Velma, and Luther. Monday morning, no delays." There was a pause. Then, "I've been waiting for you to say that." I looked at the newspaper one last time, folded it, placed it in the bottom drawer of the file cabinet labeled Fisk, Legal. "I'm done being edited out of my own story," I said. Monday morning came colder than expected, even for October in Kalispell. I wrapped a scarf around my neck, not for warmth, but for structure. Something about the added pressure made my spine feel straighter. At 7:43 a.m., 3 certified letters left Nadine's office. By 9:10, Reuben, Velma, and Luther each had them in hand. Cease and desist. Unauthorized use of my name, likeness, and property. Notice of sole legal title holder, dated and notarized. 30-day eviction warning. Luther was the first to call. "You out of your mind?" he snapped before I even said hello. "No," I said calmly. "Not anymore." He hung up. Velma's call came 5 minutes later. It started with silence, then tears. Not real ones. The kind meant to trip you up emotionally, to make you forget your own name. "This is how you treat your parents?" she whispered. "After everything we gave you?" I almost laughed. "You gave me one thing, once. A name. Everything else I built on my own, Velma." She said something else. I didn't catch it. I'd already set the phone down on the counter and walked away. By the end of the day, they had gathered Marin. They called it a family meeting. No spouses, no children. Just the core. I wasn't invited, but I knew it would happen. That's why I'd called Marin 2 days ago. "I need you to go," I said, "and I need you to record everything." "Kira," she hesitated, "you're asking me to spy on your own family." "I'm asking you to give me the truth, something they're never going to do voluntarily." So Marin went. I didn't hear from her until well after dark. Around 8:30, my phone buzzed while I was sitting in my truck outside a closed florist shop, half watching the light from inside flicker as the owner cleaned up. Her message was short. "Marin, you'll want to hear this." Attached was a voice recording. I played it. "Turn the volume up. Let it fill the cab like smoke." Luther's voice came first. "She was never supposed to keep the cabin. We just let her believe it until we figured out what Ruben needed. Hell, she was barely using it. It's not like she was building a family there." Velma chimed in, her voice sugar-coated but sharp underneath. "Kira always needed something to cling to. Some project, some cause. I suppose we should have corrected her sooner, but she seemed happy playing caretaker." There was laughter. Ruben, probably. Then another voice I couldn't place, saying, "Well, she's making it difficult now." To which Velma replied, almost cheerfully, "She always does." I didn't cry. My jaw clenched, but not from sadness. It was the kind of tension you get when someone hands you the last puzzle piece after you've stared at the missing spot for days. I forwarded the file to Nadine with one line. "Use this." 10 minutes later, Nadine called me. "I'm adding it to the eviction packet," she said. "I'll file a supplemental declaration and, if necessary, prepare a public statement." "I want it ready," I said. "If they try to spin this again, I'll go public myself." "You sure?" she asked. "That's a war you can't unstart." "They started it. I'm just refusing to lose quietly." The next day, I printed a copy of the transcript and highlighted every line that mattered. I slipped it into a manila folder, added it to the growing pile on my dining table. Everything I'd tried to handle in silence, they'd weaponized. Now I had the weapons, and I wasn't aiming to wound. I was aiming for truth. By Tuesday morning, the leaves had gone brittle on the trees, clinging only because they hadn't been told to fall yet. I sat at the breakfast bar with my phone face down, a slice of toast cooling on the plate in front of me. Nadine's message had come through an hour earlier. PDF attached. Subject line simple. Fisk v. Bellamy. Civil claim. Motion for mediation. They were suing me for family contribution, for emotional equity, for parental investment. It read like a passive-aggressive Hallmark card stapled to a legal threat. Their lawyer, someone out of Missoula I'd never met, claimed I'd unjustly withheld what was built through generational love and sacrifice. He used phrases like unspoken understanding and cultural inheritance. I forwarded the file to Nadine. She replied 2 minutes later. "Nadine, this is bluffing wrapped in sentimentality." Me? Let's unwrap it. The mediation was scheduled for Thursday morning. No courtroom, no jury. Just a conference room with bad lighting and a mediator trained to smile through dysfunction. I arrived early, wore a gray blazer over black jeans and boots I hadn't worn since the last funeral in our family. I parked 2 spaces away from Ruben's truck. Inside the building, a receptionist with soft eyes asked if I'd like coffee. I declined. My stomach didn't need the help turning. The door opened behind me. Velma entered first, arms folded tight over her chest. Ruben walked behind her, flipping through a manila folder like he expected to be called on. Luther came in last, jaw clenched, saying nothing. We sat around the oval table in awkward silence. The mediator, a CA-7LM woman in her 50s named Carla, opened the session. "We're not here to punish, only to clarify," she said. "This space is neutral." Neutral. I almost smiled. Velma jumped in quickly. "We're not trying to hurt anyone," she said, hands folded neatly. But it's not right that everything just goes to Kira when we've all been part of that cabin's life. Reuben nodded. I helped with the roof repairs. I handled the yard work when she wasn't around. Luther said nothing, just stared. I listened. Then I reached into my bag and handed Carla a flash drive. I think we should all hear something before we continue. Carla looked at me, then at the others. Do you mind? Reuben shifted. What is it? Your words, I said, when you thought I wouldn't hear them. Carla inserted the drive, adjusted the volume, and hit play. Velma's voice came through first. She lives alone. Why does she need the cabin? Luther followed. It was always going to be Reuben's. She just doesn't know when to let go. And then Velma again, soft and syrupy. She always needed something to pour herself into. Poor thing, letting her believe we'd give it to her was the easiest way to keep the peace. The room froze. Reuben stared at the table. Velma looked away. Luther finally blinked. Carla let the recording finish. No commentary, no crosstalk. When it ended, she folded her hands. This doesn't meet the standards for emotional equity, she said. There's no contractual claim, no shared financial burden on the property. What it does qualify for is eviction. Velma opened her mouth, closed it. Her face turned the shade of wet clay. Reuben muttered, You really meant it all along. I looked straight at him. More than any of you ever did. By Friday afternoon, I returned to the cabin with the sheriff's deputy and a real estate appraiser. The drive there was quiet. The fields had lost their green. The air smelled like pine needles and stale apology. I stepped out first. The deputy followed. Reuben's truck was still in the driveway. Inside, boxes were half-packed. Corinne glared at me like I'd kicked over her garden. Velma sat on the couch with a tissue, theatrically dabbing at eyes that didn't look red. Luther stood by the mantel, hands on his hips, like he still thought posture meant power. You have 72 hours, the deputy said. She's the rightful owner, paperwork's final. Velma gasped. You're evicting your own family? I didn't flinch. I'm enforcing the truth. Reuben looked at me, something resigned in his face now. It was never about the house for you, was it? I didn't answer that. Because it had been. Once. But not anymore. 3 weeks passed. I stood in the doorway of the now empty cabin, keys in one hand, breath slow. The air was thinner than I remembered, maybe from the cold, or maybe because the place felt bigger, without the weight of secrets pressing in from every wall. The boxes had been shipped. The locks changed. No more floral curtains Velma insisted on. No more framed pictures of Reuben fishing on the mantel. Just hardwood floors and the echo of everything I had finally said out loud. Outside, the leaves had turned full amber and ochre, just like the fall I first painted the porch myself at 26, after Luther forgot to follow through on his promise to hire someone. I had done it with my own hands, a stiff brush, and one long Saturday of silence. At the time, I told myself it was an act of love. Now I see it was proof I could build something without their permission. I ran my fingers along the edge of the kitchen counter, tracing an old chip in the granite. The last time Reuben had slammed a pan here, he said he didn't mean to, but the look he gave me said otherwise. And I had cleaned it up like I always did, both the counter and the conversation. Today, there was nothing left to tidy. I whispered, not to anyone, just into the open room. It was never the wood or the walls I wanted. It was a place that remembered me. And the thing was, it never did. I closed the door for the final time. Didn't lock it. The new owners would do that when they arrived next week. I had sold it fast, below market. I didn't want to make money on it. I wanted it gone. Off my books, out of my bloodstream. That night, I sat on my porch in Kalispell, knees tucked under a worn quilt, mug of herbal tea cooling in my palms. A text buzzed in. It was Velma. You got what you wanted. Hope you're happy now. No punctuation, just sharpness. I stared at it for almost an hour. I could have said 100 things. Could have sent copies of the utility bills, the receipts for groceries, the therapist notes I never submitted to insurance. Instead, I typed one sentence: "I'm at peace. I hope someday you can be too." Then I deleted the thread. No screenshot, no save, no archive. Letting go doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's just the act of choosing not to hit reply. A month later, I moved to Hamilton, a town small enough to disappear in, but big enough to start again without explanation. I leased a small space on the corner of 5th and Grove, painted in soft green with a tin mailbox shaped like a birdhouse. The sign outside read, "Bellamy & Co. Grief Recovery and Family Transition Services." People came. Slowly, then steadily. Women mostly. Some young, some older. Some who had fled bruises they never talked about. Others who just felt unseen in rooms filled with people they loved. I didn't tell them about the cabin, or the lawsuit, or the photo albums where I was always just outside the frame. But I knew what to say when they asked how to begin again. Sometimes survival isn't leaving something, I'd say. It's staying gone. One Tuesday morning, a newspaper envelope arrived at the office. No note, no return address. Inside was a folded clipping from the Flathead Beacon. Correction notice. Ownership clarification. The property known as the Fisk family cabin, as referenced in prior articles, is legally and solely owned by Kira Bellamy. I didn't frame it. I didn't even finish reading it. I slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk, under a client consent form and 2 utility bills. Then I walked over to the window, watched as a cloud moved over the ridge, casting a long shadow over the Bitterroot River. And for the first time in years, the silence around me didn't ache. It didn't ask for anything. It just let me be. They didn't just lose the house. They lost the script. And I didn't need an audience to believe the ending.